Watch ya. You're listening to the Disability Program Specialized Services Podcast.
Wajek. Agwendodi Jabatok Ojinoch Dana Lawler Guest Cynthia Miller Lotman. Dapshkono Dabitsio Disability Program Specialized Services. Ayogidimo Higo Jinoch Early Language Development and Developmental Language Disorder. I Jaji Nashtotumk Kiamagai Duishaji Saitum Kneo. The difference between language, speech, and communication. Algunenio Misojado Witmaguiko, I should say it. Goda, Sagodi Jabato, Gojinoch Dana and Cynthia. Goda, Tinskumna.
Welcome. My name is Cynthia Miller-Lotman, and I'm an occupational therapist and intervention team leader at Disability Program Specialized Services.
And I work with Cynthia. My name is Dana Lawler. I am a speech-language pathologist and a clinical advisor on the Disability Programs team with Cynthia.
Yeah, and we're excited because during training week that we held in March 2021, we, the Disability Program Specialized Services team, did several online information sessions about different disability topics. And Dana and I spoke about developmental language disorder and also early language stimulation. But in the last 30 minutes of our presentation of the afternoon, we received and answered so many related questions, and we were really excited to dig into this.
Yeah, and this is a really big topic. And because there were so many of you participating, thank you so much for that. We're not really able to dig into every question, right, Cynthia? Yeah. And we wanted to further explain some things. So we're recording this today as the third part of our series in the hopes that by listening or watching, you're going to get some clarification and you're going to get some more information. But if you really want to know where these questions are coming from, we encourage you to go back to our webpage, disabilityprogramspecializedservices.org, and look for the podcasts where on episode 6 we talk about what is developmental language disorder. And on episode 7, we talk about how to stimulate early language skills.
That's great, Dana. Yeah, so we're really excited to answer the questions. So all of these questions that I'm about to read it to you came from our chat. So we had a chat box on our online version, and people typed these in. So these are really coming from people, teachers, educators, caregivers. So I thought we could just dig in. I have the first one ready,
Perfect.
Dana.
Let's go for it.
Great. So this is one that came up a couple of times in different ways, but it was, what is the difference between a language and a speech delay or disorder? So delay versus disorder.
Right. And to be able to talk about delay disorder when things go wrong, we need to back up and talk about what are these things, right? What is language? What is speech? People get them, understandably, people get them confused and have a hard time distinguishing and differentiating them. So let's just start with that piece. So there are two parts. When we're talking about language, there's two parts to language. There's the comprehension or the receptive language. So when you're thinking about receptive, receiving, and then there's the expressive part to language. And expressive is really how we use language, right? So it starts with words. Like if we had a word like dog, and then there's little parts to language too, depending on the language that you're using, that often carry meaning. So for example, in English, we would say one dog, two dogs. That S at the end of dogs carries a meaning. It means that there's more than one dog. That's part of language. And then how we put those words together to make a sentence, like I have a big dog and not big dog I have. Right? Those are all those rules, putting words together, how it makes sense. And eventually, when we're putting those sentences together to tell a story or to retell an event, that's language. So I could say something like, I have a big dog at home and his name is Rufus and he likes to sleep on my bed every night. So I'm telling you a story and I'm using my language to tell you. So that's the expressive part of language. We're talking about then the comprehension or the receptive part of language. And those are the messages that we understand. that we receive, the directions that we follow, the stories we understand. And we can also talk about reading comprehension. So we talked in our podcast about building that comprehension, that piece under the water.
And just to clarify, Dana, comprehension, right, is not hearing. It's really understanding. So sometimes parents say, but their hearing is fine. I've checked it. Yes, absolutely. That's a great start. Just to clarify that comprehension is not hearing. It's great if many parents say that they've gotten a hearing test and their child's hearing is good, and that's a great place to start. But comprehension is understanding, as Dana said.
Exactly.
It's about making sense, right, of the message that you
is being
said.
is being able to you first hear it and then being able to make sense of that message that you hear. Exactly. Yeah. So, and then if we were to talk, Cynthia, about speech, right? We talked about language. We talked a little bit about hearing and how that factors in. And now speech is the sounds of language. It's when people are talking. That is one form of language, right? So speech needs the movement of the tongue, the lips, the jaw, the palate to make those sounds. And speech essentially is the verbal component of language.
Yeah, and I really remember my son had trouble making the sounds. He knew the words to say. He had trouble getting his mouth to move in a way to say an S or a W sound, a W sound. So he had trouble learning that, and he had to see a speech language pathologist to help him learn how to make those sounds with his mouth.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are different reasons why making sounds might be hard for a child, and there are different speech problems. So speech and language are different, and those are the two big areas that a speech language pathologist will investigate during an assessment. So someone can have difficulty in both areas or in one.
And so it really will be the speech language pathologist that over time will determine if it was just a delay or if it actually is a disorder.
Exactly. Yep. Yep.
Great. Okay, so another question, similar, but another one. What is the difference between language and communication?
Okay, so let's bring in the piece of communication. So we talked about language, receptive, expressive language, and now we're bringing in the communication piece. We hear people talk about communication. So communication is a very global, kind of big umbrella term that we use. It's all the ways that we use to get our message understood, right? It's our facial expressions, it's pointing to pictures or images, it's gestures, it's our tone of voice. It could be through sign language. It could be through writing, like through emails or text messages. It's all the ways that we get our messages across and how we receive those messages, right? Like listening, reading, and looking. So it's a big term.
Okay, great. So I guess just to make real of that, so someone could be able to communicate, but they don't have words, because they would communicate through their gestures and their facial expressions and writing, but they don't have words, but they're still communicating.
Absolutely.
Is that what
Absolutely.
Okay.
Have you, if you've ever seen one who uses like ASL or American Sign Language to communicate, they are communicating. They might not be, talking the way that we are talking right now, but they are communicating very much with their faces, right? With their gestures, with their signs.
Yeah. And so that's something I think as we're having more sensibility to people with disabilities is that just because someone doesn't talk doesn't mean they're not communicating.
Yeah.
So it's just a little piece I wanted
to.
Yeah.
And doesn't mean that they're not very intelligent, right? Or bright. There's underlying, whether or not you talk doesn't actually say anything about what you can do in life or how intelligent you are, right?
Right. Okay. Next question. So this is from a teacher, and it said, I have a student who has a hard time in speaking and in learning. How can I make learning for him much easier to understand for me?
Whoa, that's a really big question. And we got a few of these questions, Cynthia, where people really wanted to know about a specific person that they had in mind. And it's really not possible for us, unfortunately, to get into it. And so we're going to disappoint you a little bit because I'm not going to be able to give you specific answers. In order to be really helpful, we need to know you and the student. To be helpful to you, we really need to be able to know that student, right?
And Dana, I have maybe a little story that I could, because I was an occupational therapist that worked in a school, and I never ran into the speech language pathologist. So I was on my own, and if I had to figure out, or the teacher and I had to figure out what was their language level, what was their communication level? Well, very simply speaking, this is putting it very simply, but we would go to his file and we'd actually go read the speech and language report. And if he doesn't have one, okay, then we'd go somewhere else. But then I'd become a detective. If there was no report, I would ask the parent, how do they communicate? What is the best way? How do they tell you what they want? I would go to the last year teacher who probably has so much knowledge after having spent a year with the child. Who else knows him in the school? Who else could give you some information? So just really become a detective for that student. And yes, in the ideal situation, if there was a speech language pathologist in the school, you would obviously consult them. But not everyone has that luxury right now. So you would just become a detective.
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. And so interesting too, because I worked in a school as well, right? And I didn't have necessarily an occupational therapist around or a psychologist around. So when we're talking about learning encompasses many, many different things. So I would need to dig in a little bit and to ask the questions about, okay, does this child have specific learning needs with regards to their attention, with regards to their sensory processing? So I would need to be a detective and dig in on those aspects so that I could get a big picture of what's going to be best to help this child learn.
And if we go back to just the message when helping a child learn with a disability, and let's assume maybe a language disorder, and you have to make sure that they are regulated, they are in a space to learn, that their body can pay attention. We know that in general, using visuals and visual schedules really help children who are struggling with communication and language, and attention issues and sensory issues. So we know these things work. So make sure they're regulated in their body and they're ready to learn. Bring visuals in and bring visual schedules in.
Yeah, and those routines, right, Cynthia? A lot of those routines of visual schedules are helping you to kind of put those routines in place. And all students are going to benefit from the routine. There's no harm in doing these things. So we encourage you to kind of try to put those things in place and it will benefit all students.
Yeah, and I just want to remind you that you can go back to our website at disabilityprogramsspecializedservices.org. Just search how to make a visual schedule. We have templates there and we have blog posts and other podcasts. So please go take a look. So Dana, I think we'll move on to our next question. Yes. And this came, I don't know who this came from, but I'll read it out. Is it still considered DLD when another person cannot understand what your child is trying to say, but as a parent, I understand my child?
Oh.
So if the teacher doesn't understand, but I understand them,
is it DLD?
Is it still DLD?
Well, listen, DLD, it's not developmental language disorder until an assessment has been done by a speech language pathologist. That's always going to be the case. We can't call it something until we have had the speech language pathologist evaluate, right? And do that kind of assessment to kind of come to that conclusion or not. And if others don't understand, it is a concern. It is a concern because it could have some impacts on how the child can interact and play with their peers, or how they can interact and understand their teachers, or with other family members who maybe don't see them as often. There can be those impacts. So if you are concerned at all, we'd encourage you. This is one of our big messages today is speak with your doctor and look into getting an assessment done. I've seen frustration build in children who don't have a reliable means of communicating. And that frustration, unfortunately, can build, then it can, turn into aggression or other behaviors that are unfortunate, that we don't really want the child to have to resort to if they don't have a means of communicating. So it's important to kind of dig in. And, when you think about a child at the beginning, their world is very small and their people around them are very few. They might only be the parents and the siblings, and they might only need to interact with those people. But when their world starts to open up, when they start going to daycare, when they start school, it's really important that they're going to be able to communicate and be understood by lots of different people. So,
yeah. And if you go back to even it's so true. It's easy because we understand to not take action as a parent and assume that others will catch up. But I think it is at least a red flag for you as a parent if other people are telling you, not just one, but a couple, that they're not understanding your child. It is really important to speak to your doctor, because we know that early intervention, which our whole podcast on early stimulation talked about, is really important for a child's language future.
Yeah, and their
So,
self-esteem, right? And their self-esteem and their social interactions, and the impact can be quite significant. So yeah, it's good to investigate sooner than later.
And I would also just remind, if you're on the other side and you are a teacher, letting a family know that you're concerned, just be gentle, because everyone's journey, I know we talked about this in our training week, everyone's journey to diagnosis is different. And just be gentle, but don't give up. If you're concerned, continue gently bringing it up, especially if you're in the education field and you have a lot of experience and notice this. But also if you're a grandparent, just do it nicely and softly. And over time, the family will take their own journey to taking action.
Yeah, that's a really important message for sure.
So I guess we can go to our next question.
Yeah, skipping right along.
And again, I think it's from a parent. And it says, I think my child will grow out of it. I guess I grow out of their language problems. So I think my child will grow out of it. Why bother?
That's a sentiment that I've heard several times, like they're going to grow out of it, or and wouldn't it be great if we knew? It would be so great if we had that ability to look into the future and say, it'll work itself out. But there is no seeing into the future, right? And if we did, we'd be winning the lottery all over the place. But we don't have that ability to do that. So we don't know if a child will outgrow their struggles or not. And if their struggles are there, their struggles need the attention and warrant us to help them, right? So early language stimulation is really powerful, and it's power to you as parents, as teachers, as community members. So it might not end up being a disorder, but stimulating language is always going to be helpful. It's always going to benefit. So if there is a small gap now, we encourage you to put some energy into it, put some energy and some time into it, and it might really help in the long run. And if it is DLD, it is developmental language disorder, and you provide that stimulation now, then the effects of the DLD might be like smaller down the road, right? I think, Cynthia, like one of our take-home messages has been, if you're not sure and if you have concerns, please talk to your doctor and have an assessment done.
Yeah, and remember that we do have some really easy things that can be put in place, and that's in our early language stimulation episode. So that was episode 7, and Dana goes through some really fun ideas you can do that fit into your day, because I know we say do more as parents, but there's some really neat things that she talks about in that episode of really fitting language into your day and giving your child who may be at risk of a language disorder a greater chance of more success.
Yeah, none of us need more things to do. So we're really hoping that these ideas and suggestions can be just layered and scattered throughout your day as you go about doing what you need to do, because nobody wants more homework.
No, we don't. So Dana, another question that came is DLD seen in children who use sign language? So can you have DLD, but also, I guess, be deaf?
So a child who uses sign language, yes, is deaf or is hard of hearing, and they might have language difficulties, but it wouldn't be developmental language disorder. It would be another type of language disorder that would be associated with being deaf or having a hearing loss.
Okay.
I hope that answers it. It's
great.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think if I get it correctly, it means that yes, you could have a language disorder associated with deafness, but it would not actually be called DLD. It would be something else. Okay.
Yep. Exactly. It would be language disorder associated with hearing loss or,
Okay. What other things would you suggest for parents to do to help the child's language development if the parents don't know how to read or don't feel comfortable reading?
This was such a good question that came up, and I'm glad we're kind of circling back and digging back into it again, because I know, Cynthia and I, you and I have spoken so much about this and how we've, exposed our own children to language throughout the years and different strategies that we've used. So it's fun. These are the fun ones to do. The play-by-play strategy, if you remember, go back to our episode if you don't remember, if you want to hear it again. The play-by-play strategy, I think, is a really, really great one to be able to use throughout your day. So you're basically giving a running commentary of what you see or what you do or what your child is seeing or what your child is doing. It's becoming almost like a sports commentator throughout your day. It's that internal voice coming out.
So Dana, can I give an example of that? Let's see if I remember what play-by-play is. So you're sitting there right now and I'd be like, Dana, look at you sitting in that nice room. Wow, you're sitting up so straight. You've got on a nice pair of glasses and there's a microphone and a beautiful picture. Oh, look, I think there's a mountain in the back of your picture.
Love it. It's perfect.
I really like that.
It's perfect. That's
that
it.
a play-by-play?
That was a play-by-play. You described what you were seeing, right? You put words into tell me what you were seeing and what was grabbing your attention. That was great. I love it. And it is something that doesn't, it feels a bit awkward at the beginning. It feels a bit weird. It's like, why? It's obvious. It's obvious that she has glasses on. Why am I going to say she has glasses on? But it's not obvious to the child or to the person who's learning, right? It's not necessarily obvious. So we're giving them that beautiful opportunity to hear the words, to go with what they are seeing. And that's a play-by-play. One of the other things that we talked about is that you can tell a story. So you don't need to be able to read a story, but you could tell a story. And so most nights when I'm putting my son to bed, he's 8 years old now, I tell him a story and he loves it. And now he asks for them. And sometimes I get stumped. I'm like, oof, you gotta give mommy a minute here. I can't think of what my story is going to be about tonight. And you can take something that you saw during the day or something that you did during the day. And that's often what I do. And I build a story around that, right? So I'm going to give you an example like this, okay? And this is how I start all my stories. There once was a boy named Steve, and he liked to do fun things. One day, Steve and his family decided to go for a long walk, but they didn't want to go for a walk in their neighborhood, so they went on an adventure. They found a forest, and they couldn't believe all the animals that they met along the way. There were squirrels and bunnies. There were so many different birds, and they couldn't even count them all. There were so many. All the birds were singing, and it sounded like a beautiful orchestra. And that's how I would tell my story. That would have been something that we did during the day. We would have gone for a walk in the forest, and I'm just retelling it to him again. And he loves it. It doesn't need to be new. It doesn't need to be, the most imaginative thing. Just tell a story. Yeah.
You're making me laugh. I have a really big imagination, and all my stories seem to do about candy and I don't know, adventure. So, for example, my husband would say to me, "How do you do that? Like, you're talking about a lollipop," and my kids and I had a lollipop that day, and then the whole story would be about, oh, in the lollipop land, that was different colors. There was purple and red lollipops, and then the whole path was painted with lollipops all over it. Oh. And we would just have funny discussions. Anyway, it can go anywhere. They can be crazy. They cannot make sense. The kids just seem to love them. And if I get it right, Dana, you were surrounding them with
Yep.
language, and it's like a bath in language. And the more language you surround children in, the more vocabulary they get, the more they hear it, especially if they're having a hard time with language.
Yeah. Yeah. That's that blanket of language, right? You're going to surround them with that blanket of language. So if they were to close their eyes, they would be able to see exactly what you're telling them with that beautiful lollipop land, right? And you're using lots of different words. Of course you could see the red, of course you could see the orange, but you really want them to see it, and you really want them to have that big picture. That's exciting. I want you to tell me one of those stories one time when we're together.
Well, Dana, the next question that came up was, how do you know, I guess this is a parent, how do you know if it's familial, so inherited DLD, or lack of stimulation? And will be attending school enough to catch them up, or does it require some home and school stimulation?
But yeah, it's another good question. And again, there's no real way, unfortunately, of knowing, right? Until that assessment is done by a speech language pathologist who can tease it apart to know if it really is developmental language disorder, if there's a lack of stimulation, and what would be needed to be able to catch up, right? I can't really answer that question, but I'm going to come back again and say that there's no harm in starting now. It's best to give the stimulation now, and does it really matter, if it's DLD, if it's not DLD? What we really do know, regardless, is that early stimulation is the best thing, and it will help all children. Right. So please go back and listen again on how you can learn some of these strategies to be able to use them in your everyday life.
So there was another question from a parent. So this is the parent that writes, I am a bit sad. My son is 11 and was diagnosed with DLD 2 weeks ago. All the strategies that have been discussed I did from before birth and throughout his life. I am not sure what else I can do for my son because I have naturally been practicing all these strategies you talked about. My son seems to be, though, quite aggressive because of DLD and very frustrated. I have bought visual aids for him. He can read and write and speak well for his age. It's his vocabulary and comprehension that's the problem. Is there anything else I can do to support him?
Well, my heart goes out to you, and I'm so sorry to hear that this has been so hard for you and your son. I'm glad to hear that you've gotten, a diagnosis, and that you seem to have a good sense of where some of the struggles lie, and you've done so much. So congratulations to you on being so supportive to your son. It sounds like he has so many strengths, which is fantastic. And that's what you're going to really want to continue to build on. But you can't do it on your own, right? So you need the support in order to be able to give your son the support. And you're going to need to learn and to know about other strategies that are going to be really specifically helpful to your son. So I want to know, is he being followed by a speech language pathologist? And if he's not, then I would encourage you to go get regular support from a speech language pathologist, as she or he will be able to give you ideas of things that you can do, things that you can practice, and ways that you can help your son learn that vocabulary, right? That will help him. I know speech language pathology services are not yet readily available on territory, but people are finding creative ways to get help through Jordan's Principle, and Allied Health Services are working really hard to get services on territory. So I'm really glad to say that the future is looking really bright, actually, for speech language pathology services on territory. It's coming.
And even if it ends up being telehealth, especially because it's still during COVID, but even beyond, it helps. When I was going through the articulation problems with my son, it was a lot of work on us as a parent, but I was so grateful to have those weekly follow-ups with a speech language pathologist that would guide me, and I could ask my questions too if it didn't work, because I was just the parent, and I really appreciated that support. So even if it was through telehealth, or at the time I would sometimes have a phone call, that was great support to me.
Yeah, the support is crucial, especially you've been doing like you person who is asking this has been doing this for a long time, and it's tiring and it's taxing on us as parents. And so please reach out and get the support that you need to be able to kind of refill your bucket so that you can then continue to support your son.
And this is something we're actually currently writing another podcast about with a colleague. I'm writing it. As a caregiver, it's also important that you know that you can ask for a case manager, which is usually a community worker at the CMC, at the clinic, that is assigned to you to guide you through the steps you might need, or assigned to your child. Let's say it was your son or daughter. And that's an important step you can do to even try to access even more of those speech language pathology services and get them into your home. All right. The next question and the last one of the day that we're going to address today is, I guess again, from a teacher, I think. And it says, I have a student that speaks French and English, but Cree at home. He just transferred to an English class this year. What can I do to help him build his learning and to understand? He doesn't speak much. Is it because he speaks 3 languages?
So this is probably a relatively common scenario. And so I'm glad we're talking about this. I can't tell you exactly why, he's not speaking much and whether or not it's because he speaks 3 languages. What I can tell you is exposure to multiple languages will not cause developmental language disorder. But it can be intimidating, right? If we were to put ourselves in his shoes, it can be really intimidating for people to be immersed into a different language, into a setting, of instruction where the language is being used and it's not familiar and it's not comfortable. So what I would say is just try to continue to connect with this student and let him know that it can be hard and that you see that it's hard for him. Maybe there's a story that you could tell him about what maybe you've experienced in learning a new language or a different language, or if it's not a language, another struggle that you've had in learning something new and what was helpful for you. What you really want to do right now is build up that comprehension, right? So he might be quiet because he's just trying to get his bearings and build his comprehension. We don't know, but maybe could be. So
Dana, can I just jump in here? Yeah, I just thought I have a neat story of my mother when she was, she came from an Italian family that only spoke Italian. And in grade 1, she started school. And she did know English a little bit, but mostly her spoken was going to be Italian. So the teacher didn't understand why she wasn't speaking. And she was understanding in the end, but it's because it was new to her. And it took her a few months to start using the words in English and not Italian. So it was normal for her at the time to not speak as much for those first 6 months. And I think it was after Christmas, after the Christmas break, that she was able to start speaking. But I know the teacher brought up to her parents, like, we're concerned she's not speaking.
Yeah, and that's a relative, especially in Quebec, when we have many languages, right? Many beautiful languages in our province, and children who are being put into schooling in a different language. We need to give them time. We need to give them time to be those little sponges, to take it in, and they're going to go into observer mode for a while before they take the risk of saying something, right? And some kids don't want to take that risk, right? Some kids will really wait till they know they've got it right before they start talking. So I think that's a great example. We need to give time, right? So you can also, with your students, is find out what your students really like and use that to help build their English comprehension. Yeah, we piggyback on that. So you could use stories, and stories can be used. You don't think stories just for young children, but stories with age-appropriate stories are a great way to build comprehension. Making sure that when you're giving instructions in the classroom, that it's one thing at a time, right? Developing a routine.
Yeah, if someone's having trouble learning with a new language, don't give them 10 steps of directions because it's too fast. Think of you in a foreign language if you walked into an Italian home and someone was speaking with 10 directions for you in Italian, one at a time, maybe with a gesture and a facial expression, you would understand. 5 minutes until recess, But if you said 5 minutes till recess, 2 minutes to put your shoes on, 10 minutes to, you would lose the child that's learning
Absolutely.
a new language.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good, as many gestures as you can give, right, is really, really helpful. Showing the students what you like, guiding them through it and being a model yourself for what you want them to be able to follow and do as well. Give them visuals, right? So you could be having visuals on paper, but you can also give them visuals through your body, through your gestures, and helping them, further develop their comprehension that way. Routines in the classroom are going to help all students, right? So you develop a routine for the whole classroom and you help all the students follow it, right? And they're going to help each other too, watching each other, and they're going to help each other follow it. Giving that play-by-play, if you as a teacher can start using a play-by-play at times when it's appropriate in the classroom to expose these students to English, that would be fantastic. It gives them a chance to hear more and more words. Yeah. So please go back. I'm not sure how old your students are, but a lot of the strategies that we talked about in our early language stimulation episode can be used for many different ages, right? I'm just modified a little bit. So please go back, sometimes even practicing the strategies. And when I was starting out and learning these strategies myself, I would practice them. I would practice them on my husband. I would practice them eventually when I had kids. I'd practice them with my kids. And then I was able to kind of use them and integrate them much more easily in my life, in my everyday. Yeah. So thank you to all of you who are listening, to you as parents, as educators, teachers, special needs educators, community workers, anybody who is listening in, family members, caregivers. Thank you so much for digging in with us about this. And it's really important that we all come together as a community to support our children in learning language.
Yeah, Dana, thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad we could spend a little more time really getting into the questions that community members and staff brought up during our training week, which they're important, and the stories matter, and they give everything we've learned more context. So thank you so much to all of our listeners, and also our disability programs specialized service working group that helped us with this podcast.
Thank you, and we'll talk to you again soon, hopefully.
Thanks for listening. You can stay up to date on our new blog posts by following us on Facebook or Instagram. Just search for CHB DPSS. You can subscribe to this podcast in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Just search for Disability Programs Specialized Services. If you found this episode helpful, we'd really appreciate a rating or a review as well.
Sunsets, the land, the trees, the bay. Once I finally get there, I won't forget to breathe.